Hi all, I want to cover some games from the Hastings tournament which was played in December/January, just gone. The Hastings tournament has a fantastic history behind it. The Normans introduced chess to Hastings. William the Conqueror was actually a chess player and once broke a chessboard over the head of his nephew, Louis the Fat, having accused him of cheating. Fortunately, the arbiters no longer permit this kind of behaviour at Hastings, and the current Congress grew out of the great interest in chess shown in the 1880s. So in the last Congress we had some really entertaining players, and Simon Williams, who came third equal, is someone who is very dynamic and can play, very novel opening systems. So partly this is a celebration of, his games, but also if you want a system against a Gruenfeld defence, his opponent, who's a Gruenfeld player, must have been shell-shocked at an early Williams move in the opening. After d4, knight f6, c4, g6. Now normally you'd play knight c3, but if you don't like playing against the Gruenfeld, the central pawn responsibility that you often have in the main line of the Gruenfeld, with black bearing pressure, on d4 especially, can sometimes be very uncomfortable. So Williams actually produced an early novelty. After g6, he actually played h4. And I haven't really seen this in GM games before. Well, Williams is an IM, a strong IM. His opponent didn't play d5 here. So let's see, why is he being discouraged? If d5, then maybe white can just take and even just play e4 followed by h5. This seems to be okay, according to Rybka. For example, knight c6, you can just play d5 here and even take on g6. And white's got a great game here, a small advantage out of the opening. Just playing f4 here, for example. So anyway, his opponent just played d6 after seeing that h4 move. And now Simon continued knight c3. And after knight bd7, e4, we have a kind of king's engine with h4 included. So black provokes a slight weakness in the white position with this c5 square. Williams is not too worried. He plays d5 anyway. After knight c5, he supports that e4 pawn. Black now plays a5, securing that knight outpost, so there's no b4s from white. So bishop e2 and now h6 was played. So black was already slightly concerned perhaps that white's going to play h5. This reserve card is unpleasant to always have to calculate at every single move. So by black playing h6, he's able to answer now h5 with g5. But notice, if that happens, there's a positional concession of this light square, and if white can maneuver a knight to f5 and even exchange off this light square bishop, then white's going to gain a big positional advantage as well as a fantastic knight outpost on f5. After h5, black did play g5, and we start to see this positional plan in action now in this game. After bishop e3, b6, white played bishop d1. A nice move here actually, because bishop d1 vacates e2, so this knight maneuver, knight e2 to g3 to f5, can occur. After bishop d7, knight g e2, c6, now white gave up the bishop for that knight on c5, so he's releasing a lot of the pressure on e4 and doubling black's pawns. So now after knight g3, black took on d5, bishop e7, and now bishop went back to e2. With this move, there's a positional threat of bishop b5 to try and exchange off the bishop like that, using that square. After king f8, bishop b5. So black wants to preserve that light square bishop, otherwise he's got a really terrible position with these pawns on dark squares and this big gaping light square hole. After bishop c8, knight d1. And we see now, black is actually being positionally crushed here, because this knight is rerouting to support its friendly knight here. So once they get into f5, the pressure is just going to increase here. To knight e3, knight e8, knight e3, knight g7. The opening novelty seems to have been, a big success. There hasn't been any theoretical battle in the Gruenfeld. White's avoided any central responsibility and has a very nice, position here. Bishop e2, trying to exchange off the bishop via g4. If he can get off this light square bishop, that f5 is really going to be dominated by white. So rook b8, white castled, king g8. So black's having to really improvise. That's one of the main, advantages sometimes, that you're throwing the opponent on their own resources by playing a novel opening. B3 neutralising the B file pressure a bit, but also preparing slowly A3 and B4 to try and rip open the queen side. The black rooks are not yet connected. Bishop G4, so black avoids that trade of bishops. Rook FB1, so signalling A3 and B4 as a new plan. So first Queen C3, slowly preparing it, and also tying the black queen to protect A5 at the moment. Now A3, finally now B4. So it's a nice positional symphony on both sides of the board here. White's dominating this diagonal with the bishop because black avoided that trade. This bishop is particularly awful, hemmed in by this pawn and this pawn. And that gaping, F5 stops any black counterplay with F5. So black really, is tied down here. And just waiting now on the queen side to see, hoping this is not going to be too damaging, this B4 move. But the rook coming to the 7th rank means even more pressure and more power when the knight does come to F5. E7 will also be an immediate tactical target. CB, rook takes B4. So black tries to relieve himself with this exchange of rooks. But really, he's left with a passive rook. Out of perhaps desperation, he plays this F5 now, just giving up a pawn. So Williams just takes this pawn. And now Queen E3, just offering the trade of queens. Queen B6, which black then accepts, but the rook is still very active. White's pieces are generally all much more active than black's. Bishop takes F5. Bishop takes F5. Black dare not take on F5 again, because that will be a really mighty knight on F5. But even so, after rook B7, this rook is also pretty fantastic on the 7th rank. It just seems to be, a positional crunch this game, a very instructive, positional crunch from a very novel early move in the opening. After rook D7, black is under real pressure now on D6. Knight E8, knight F5, again pressurising D6. Bishop G7, and now knight E7, and black's had enough. He resigned. What a fantastic, novel game, right from the opening. Let's have a quick overview and summary. This H4, avoiding all the Gruenfeld Defence theory, saying I'm not going to hang on, to dear life to my pawn centre. No, I'm going to put you in novel ground. You're going to have to improvise. And basically, he allowed that knight outpost on C5 because he had the intention of Bishop E3 and taking on C5 later. But the really beautiful plan here is the light square F5, the plan around that. Because the H4 had provoked G5, provoking that weakness. So it all ties up very logically as a chain of events to the creation of that F5 positional weakness. And White combines that weakness with play on the queen side as well, preparing now slowly the B4 move. And once the rooks got exchanged off, black's piece is just all more passive than white's. And this rook on the 7th was really the final, bombardment of pressure which black couldn't handle. There's no real escape here. White's threatening now knight G6 winning the exchange. Let's have a look. King H7, check. And, black's losing the exchange. So it's a pretty hopeless and dire final position. I hope you enjoyed that. And we'll look at some more Simon Williams games soon. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.